Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Friend Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, and today I'm joined by Mr. Terence Corrigan. Terence, how are you, sir?
Nick, I'm okay, and yourself?
I'm all right, thank you. So it looks like our resident madman, Hermann Pretorius, has frozen. So I'm not sure if he's here today, but last I heard, he's currently in Pretoria, so he is swelteringly hot. As am I in Joburg, and I'm sure Terence is as well. I don't know how the rest of the country is doing, but oh, this is too much. I'm over it. Anyway, let's get started.
It's
On
just kicking off, eh?
yeah, no, this is exactly why. Every time it comes to summer, I always think, oh well, at least the cold of winter's over, and then I remember why I like winter more. So let's start off with our first story of today, which is, of course, stricter BEE laws are coming down the pipeline for South Africa in 2022. Ah, here we go. No, wait, Hermann has returned to us. Hermann, how are you?
Yes, I'm present. Apologies about that. Just as we were going live, my internet decided to fall over. So I'm glad to be here.
Well, I was just saying that you are like us, almost certainly swelteringly hot, and not coping with this horrific heat at all.
This is ice water just to achieve a body temperature of sub 38 degrees Celsius.
Yeah, I'm drinking hot coffee because I'm an idiot.
Why?
So anyway, the Parliament's National Assembly has passed the Employment Equity Amendment Bill, and is now sent it to the National Council of Provinces, which is the upper house of our legislature, which no one really talks about much and doesn't do that much, but it finalizes laws. The bill will allow the Employment and Labour Minister to set employment equity targets for different business sectors. The minister can set targets for different occupational levels, subsectors, or regions. It also aims to reduce the regulatory burden on small businesses. I'm not sure how it's going to do that, but anyway, that's the stated intention. They're going to then introduce a number of 5-year sector targets, and businesses will be expected to reach these or presumably suffer some sort of sanction from the government. This is it's stated by the drafters of the bill that self-regulation wasn't working, and now it's time to get tough on companies that aren't complying with BEE fast enough. Terence, what do you make of this? What is its implications, and should we be very concerned?
Well, it's been the sort of general drift for a long time now. I think that it's the kind of thing that shows that the reform agenda, of which we have heard a lot since 2018, is a myth. It's a mirage. I was thinking about this. The word pragmatism or pragmatic has come in for some abuse of late since Mr. de Klerk's passing. That he acted not on moral but on pragmatic grounds. I must say I struggle to see why we regard pragmatism as a bad thing. I personally think that pragmatism is wonderful. It comes from the Greek word meaning deed, pragma. The idea is that you act on the basis of what the possible outcomes are going to be, and it's something that I think that the ANC has shown very little capacity for of late. Well, past decade or so. What we have instead is a rigid commitment to ideological and existing policy dogma. And here we are at that point, which was warned in the 1990s, that you go down this road, you end up with quotas. And you can call these whatever you want, but that is essentially what it is. It's another burden on doing business. And of course, they're going to say we're going to reduce the regulatory burden. It's one of these things you sort of say. I wonder how many teenagers have sworn that they'll love their significant other forever. Something that drifts away after the next Toy Story movie. Look, we remain essentially where we are. We sink into the mire, and sooner or later there will have to be some sort of reckoning with this. But as long as ideology overwhelms pragmatism, this is where we remain.
So I saw recently, of course, it was during the first bit of the negotiation story around coalitions, that I think it was Adrian Basson. I may be incorrect, in which case apologies to him, but I believe he wrote that the DA needed to go into coalition with the ANC to save Cyril Ramaphosa's reform agenda.
That was Adrian Basson.
Hermann,
I wrote a response to this.
Is this
Check it
Cyril
out. Good stuff.
Ramaphosa's reform agenda?
Yeah, well, it has to be, because it surely is his agenda, unless he has a secret reform agenda that he hasn't announced yet. If he might be playing, 4-dimensional underwater upside down cisgender chess. There might be something spectacular. No, this is his reform agenda, and the reform agenda is the reform agenda that the ANC has been adhering to since the 1950s. Hello. Am I back?
Yeah,
Am I there?
no,
Can you
hear
me?
You're back. No, he's fuzzy. Wait, Herman, can you hear us? It's just all going well for us today, isn't it? Herman, can you hear us again? No, apparently not. All right. Terence, tell us about your response to what Adrian Basson wrote. I guess this is emblematic of.
Look, it's. I suppose when you don't have reality, all you have is fantasy. Yes, what I found particularly interesting about his piece was that he was castigating the DA for putting the ANC in a situation where it was going to have to go with the EFF, have to mind. Because the ANC and the EFF would be a toxic combination, they would, that would, destroy the country, and therefore the DA would be to blame. I do think that there are a few contortions of logic there, but who am I to talk back to an esteemed member of the commentariat? So he didn't seem to think that the DA would actually bring anything or would have any claim on asking for any sort of concessions. It all seemed to be about stopping the EFF. And I also pointed out, the cynic in me kind of wonders just how that messaging would have gone down if it had been on a DA election poster. Stop the EFF. Somehow I think that we might also have a piece from someone like Mr. Basson about how dreadful this is. I seem to remember Stop Zuma being,
Yes.
being dreadful. Remember Charlene Smith actually wrote said something scathing about that. And then, she decamped to America. And I think that's great. Well, no, I mean, look, if America's where she wants to be, I'm glad. Although, evidently she doesn't have to stop Zuma, or didn't have to. But be that as it may. And I said exactly what is this reform agenda that the DA would be protecting? It certainly isn't race-based policy, BEE, growth, job creating growth. He seemed to say that
not stopping expropriation without compensation.
Well, look, Mr. Basson, to his credit, did mention that, and he talked about President Ramaphosa's Herculean efforts to stop this from destroying the country and actually to produce social justice. I don't know. Look, maybe he knows something I don't. I mean, I don't have to be the smartest guy in the room.
I've been thinking for a long time, and this is my personal view, that News 24 and Adrian Basson in particular are far too close to Cyril Ramaphosa. Like, no journalist should ever be this much in someone's corner. It is just crazy to me, and I think he's now starting to have to turn himself into a bit of a pretzel to defend his dude, so to speak. Herman, are you with us again?
I think so. It would surely seem so. Yeah, no. So the reform agenda, there is no reform agenda. The reform agenda is perhaps just the same old National Democratic Revolution stuff, just perhaps with a kinder face on a poster, because the Zuma face wasn't doing it anymore. So that's why they got Ramaphosa. And if you actually go look at what he has reformed, and if you're not as lazy as Adrian Basson and you actually try to understand what reforms he's instituted, I mean, you can name possibly, 1.5 successes of reform. Kieswetter Ratsars would I think be considered something of a reformist move. And then possibly Batoy at the NPA, but I mean we haven't seen anything there. So if we're actually going to look at policy trying to find reform, there really is nothing, because the problem with reform is it's sort of similar to when people talk about structural reform. Is it's an empty jar. You can put into reform and structural reform whatever you want to put into it, and it's like change.
It's one of these genius political concepts where you just imprint on it whatever you want to see in it. So reform can be enhancing the social justice agenda. It can also be making sure that business can operate more efficiently and that the environment is more friendly to business in general. And that is, I think, the genius of it is that it's whatever you want it to be.
And people like Adrian Basson selling the snake oil, I really honestly bloody hope there's a reckoning in his future. I mean, this is becoming not just shilling, it's immoral. It is supporting and propping up an immoral, clearly racist, clearly destructive, clearly toxic, ideological gravy train. And if Mr. Basson is on the take, which I'm not saying he is, but then perhaps he should now take that opportunity to get off that gravy train. And if he isn't on that gravy train, I doubt his judgment even more, because if he's writing these things without even getting some proper compensation for it, he's either a moron or an idiot. But on the employment equity basis, if you look at this new piece of legislation, it is quite awful. You mentioned that there might be penalties. The penalties could be anything from 1% to 10% of annual turnover, not profit, turnover. A company can be fined 10% of its annual turnover.
It can be closed down.
It could be closed down. I mean, that's enough to kill in any business when it displeases the minister. So this outsources this very hectic racist policy to a minister who is mad and is blatantly stated that he wants.
Even if you think that employment equity is the most important agenda for the country, right? Just think about the opportunities for corruption this creates. If you're an official sitting in the Labour Department or the Minister of Labour, and you now have the power to basically execute any company at will, well, they're going to be very nice to you, aren't they? And that means that suddenly you're going to start finding gifts of BMWs and things turning up at your house.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's that's why people always want to be the finance minister or the health minister or the education minister, because these have the biggest budgets. And there's a lot of political capital to go around. And with this sort of thing, Thulan Macy will get an immense amount of political capital and power to funnel patronage to his will. But I think there's something fundamental to look at here, is that in the Minister of Finance versus Van Heerden case in 2004, which was the court case that essentially allowed race-based affirmative action policies, it opened the door to that being, quote unquote, constitutional. The constitutionality of that, it was with regards to the pension benefits of MPs. So it was based not on private sector activities, but on a very specific public servant function. And with regards to the Constitution allowing racial redress, it is almost exclusively in the realm of transforming public services and public sector. It is quite quiet on the private sector. But the Van Heerden judgment sets out 3 rules that essentially allows race-based affirmative action policies to be, according to the Constitutional Court, then constitutional. Number 1, whether the policies target the disadvantaged. Number two, whether they are designed to advance the disadvantage. And number three, whether they promote the achievement of equality. BEE fails on all three of these counts. And, BEE harder, this, electric boogaloo sequel to the nonsense that we've been facing for 15 years. We know that this doesn't target the disadvantaged. This goes to the top politically connected black elite echelons that Moeletsi Mbeki calls rent seekers. Just one elite replacing another elite. That's what happened in the 1994 handover. Number two, they don't advance the interests of disadvantaged people. The majority of 80% plus schools are failing, 80% plus municipalities are failing, 80% plus of SOEs are failing. And then, of course, you look at the unemployment stats and you see that black unemployment in the first quarter of 2020, before this whole COVID disaster, was worse than in 2004, the year before BEE was implemented as government policy. Unemployment overall is worse, but black unemployment is worse in and of itself. So, and then whether they promote the achievement of equality? No, they don't. So if this were to be challenged, and these tests have never been applied by the Constitutional Court in a practical case of employment equity, but this piece of legislation offers a lot of scope for people to become involved. And this is, I challenge anyone listening to this who might be a member of a chamber of commerce or anything to take this up and go somehow, somewhere, the legal route. Start mobilizing businesses against this nonsense. It is racist, it is unconstitutional, and worse than these two things, it makes South Africa regress, in fact, because black people, the vast majority of poor people in South Africa being black, will not benefit from this nonsense.
Right.
In fact, it might actually chase away investment. No, not might. It will chase away investment, and it will kill businesses that should and could either service or hire or, cater for the needs of black South Africans. It's madness.
It makes us poorer. It opens up more opportunities for corruption, and it doesn't fix race relations. So get rid of it. All right, so let's talk about coalitions. We, of course, talked about them yesterday, but we now have some couple of latest developments. I also just want to get your guys' general takes on how things are shaping up. So yesterday we talked about the EFF, the PA, and the DA, but now we've got some news from the IFP. And Hermann, the IFP have done something a little bit odd, haven't they?
Yes. But that's just the IFP these days. On the 7th of November, mere days, a week after the elections, they said the IFP will not go into coalition with the ANC in KwaZulu-Natal. 10 days later, the IFP has now concluded a coalitions agreement with the ANC. And I always need to, it's like the leader of UKIP these days. I always need to Google who's the leader of the IFP. And it is someone called Velenkosini Hlabisa. And I won't remember that past the duration of this podcast, and I won't, have a problem with anyone listening to this, because the man is a vacuum. In terms of taking the helm of what should be a federalist, small c conservative, fiscally free market orientated party, and then essentially just becoming a political simp and doormat for the ANC, when 10 days before the IFP has said they won't do this, just really goes to show that I hate it when the DA is right on this specific. I'll conclude my answer now. I hate it when the DA is right on this thing. Don't vote for other opposition parties. I hate that because constitutionally and electorally, it isn't true. We've got proportional systems and so on to make sure that we don't get things like wasted votes. But if you have to look politically at what's been happening, the DA has been proven right on every one of these issues, except perhaps the Freedom Front Plus, and coming very close to being right on Action SA. But Patriotic Alliance, the IFP, these parties, the DA going into this election said these will be votes for the ANC. People said don't believe the DA when they tell these lies, and here we sit.
Yeah, so specifically what the IFP said was, we are going to go into coalition. We are not going to go into coalition with the ANC in KZN because the ANC in KZN is toxic, and we will consider coalitions with them outside of the province. And the news story coming out of Newsroom Africa, which is not the world's most trusted source, but anyway, said that they've agreed to a coalition agreement with the ANC in 21 municipalities in KZN. Yeah, you never really know what you're going to get with the IFP. Sometimes they can be brilliant, and sometimes they can be
idiots.
Yes. Anyway, Terence, your thoughts on how the elections, the coalitions are shaping up in general? How do you think it's going for all the parties? And I just want to, I was given at some point a DA pamphlet about the Patriotic Alliance. And actually, this is what Hermann was saying. This is what the thing looks like. So our audio listeners won't be able to see it, but it says, "Don't waste your vote on traitors." And then it tries to connect Gayton McKenzie to Jacob Zuma. The DA people who wrote that pamphlet right now, seeing that the PA has gone into coalition with the ANC, are rubbing their hands with glee at this news. Terence, what do you make of all this mess?
Well, okay, just let me add a small caveat. I don't like the word traitors. I think it has a particular significance, and once again, I'm old enough to remember Nelson Mandela speaking in 1997 at the Mafeking conference, where that was effectively his line against opposition parties. And I don't think that's a productive use of word. The guy might be a shyster. Traitor is something very different. But leave it aside. Yeah, look, I think that there is a widespread belief, or a widespread, let's say, sort of opposition practice of wanting the validation of the ANC and the pecuniary and positional advantages that come with that. Rolf Meyer said back in the 1990s that in order to progress in South Africa, you must be in the ANC's slipstream. There have been a progression of smaller parties that have, I've said this before, used the word independent. And generally these independents will sort of flood off in direction ANC, because that's kind of where the stuff is. I don't know how long that's going to last, but I think that's definitely happening at the moment. In the case of the IFP, it's a little bit more complex. I think it's one of the most intriguing stories. Remember that the IFP and the ANC were at war. I mean, they literally killed each other. I'm also old enough to remember that period where the IFP was seen in ANC propaganda as worse than the NP. It was there was. I was at the University of Natal, and I remember that the IFP was one party that was prohibited from being on the campus. It didn't matter whether it was someone like Gavin Woods, or it was some of these colourful gentlemen in the Edendale Valley who did stuff. It was just IFP prohibited. I actually remember there was a debate about political violence in the first in my first year, was 1993. The ANC, the DP, and the NP were invited, not the IFP. I said I didn't think there was a speaker missing here, but no one asked me, and I was too late. But I do think that there is something that they do have in common. They have a very similar social base. And I think that there is, at some level, a kind of connection that I think at lower levels of the party, the low levels of those parties, that they can make with each other. It was remarked in the mid-90s when peace started to break out in KZN, that if you looked at the people who were making peace, it tended to be the Zulus on both sides. The sort of white and Indian peripheries tended to be very hard line about not accommodating the other. But then, as was pointed out, it wasn't their social circle that was being shot at. I think there is still some of that. So I think one needs to kind of step through the looking glass to understand this.
Final thoughts, Hermann.
Yeah, no. The sad thing is that the IFP, and this is the danger with identity-based parties, is the IFP is, for better or worse, based on Zulu nationalism, and that might be good and well according to some people, but the problem is Zulu nationalism can go either way as long as it advances the interests of Zulu nationalists. And the sad thing is, a lot of people, and I think people like Koos van der Merwe, might have been ideologues, or what's the Ambrosini guy? They might have been ideologues, believing in sort of a small c conservative, federal, broadly free market ideology. And at least in my mind, until relatively recently, the IFP was that. But it's negotiations like these and results like these that really show that a party might have ideology, it might have policy positions, but if it's based on ethnic identity, at the end of the day, it is going to be unpredictable in the ideological sphere, and that it reduces that party to a party of grievance and not a party of governance, because it really can only complain about the treatment of its tribe. So for people who voted for the IFP, seeking perhaps a black conservative or a non-racial conservative party with federalist instincts, I mean, that this must be a huge disappointment. And I hope people watch and learn from this, because I know people who voted for the IFP with that in mind, and this should come as something of a rude awakening.
Indeed. All right, so let us go overseas to very briefly discuss a complicated story that we can't get properly into, but this is something that's kind of ongoing at the moment. Some Middle Eastern people who wanted to enter the EU as migrants, refugees, basically looking for economic opportunities. They tried to enter by traveling to the country Belarus and then crossing the border into Poland. The Poles stopped them, but when they tried to go back, the Belarusians sort of forced them to stay on the border. And now it appears that the Belarusian army was assisting them in trying to break through the Polish border onto the other side, giving them tear gas, rocks, and laser pointers to blind Polish soldiers.
It does say a lot about the Belarusian military if rocks is one of the armaments provided.
And so this seemed to cause a sort of escalation. The Poles, who are very touchy about taking migrants, sent a lot of soldiers to the border. They said, we're going to arrest anyone who comes through. We're going to deport them. The Russians and Belarusians then demanded that the EU give them money in order to solve the crisis, and also that they comply with some of their demands on oil pipelines or gas pipelines. And then there was sort of a chain reaction of escalation, where the Belarusians and Russians started doing military exercises together near the area, and the Russians started building up a huge number of troops on the border with Ukraine. And things have gotten a bit tense in the region. So Terence, very briefly, what do you think of this?
Well, before I go, I'd just like to shout out to DK that I'm old enough to remember fill in the blanks. I'm not actually older than the Queen. However, I do remember Charles and Di's royal wedding. My mom made me sit through the entire thing because this was history.
You must have been about 7.
I was older than that, actually. Just dates me. I'm also old enough to remember when Poland was a communist country, and I think that this actually explains a lot about their attitude. The Poles have a very strong sense of national identity, and two major traumas within living memory: the Second World War and
Soviet occupation.
The communist period. I think they feel any sense of threat very, very keenly, and anything that will disrupt the idea of Poland as Polish, hence their reluctance with immigration. That being said, I think that just because they're paranoid doesn't mean people aren't out to get them. I think that since World War II, Hungary, the Czech Republic, Czechoslovakia, Poland, etc., that was the Soviet Union, or I think in today's term, Russia's buffer. And I think a neutralized or a destabilized Poland would fit very well into Russia's geopolitical design.
No, exactly. Anyway, we are out of time to talk any more about this. And I see that load shedding has also just started. So happy load shedding, everyone. And with that, I bid you a farewell, and we shall see you tomorrow on the Daily Friend Show. Cheers, everyone.